welcome to Frankly Speaking, the podcast that gains access to real and inspiring people. Before we welcome today's guest, Steve Wraith, I'd just like to make a few announcements. We welcome our new sponsor, Sheet Roofing Limited, specialists in all aspects of roofing and asphalt works. From residential to large commercial properties, all work is covered with insurance that guarantees. A family company with over 50 years experience. I'd like to thank all those who continue to support the podcast, particularly those who've taken the time to subscribe to us. I'd like a few more if it's possible. Appreciate all the likes and the positive comments, because some of that is quite, supportive of our guests, and it's the guests we're concerned about. I'd also like to mention the Alzheimer's Society, which is our current charity that we're supporting. We like to recognise all the amazing work that they're doing for both sufferers and their families, and we'll continue to do that. And at some stage later in the year, we'll be taking part in some activities to show that support. Equally, we'd like to thank Mac the Hat Media for all their support and help their technical advice that they give us. But in the meantime, I want to get down to business. I'll give a brief introduction to our guest today. We've said in some of our advance publicity that he's a man with many strings to his bows, and I'm sure you'll realise that once we get to talk. I'll describe him as that. He's an actor, he's a writer, producer, MD, promoter, podcaster. I'm sure he'll finish the rest off for us. So, Steve, welcome to Frankly Speaking, mate.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, guys. Thanks for having us.
Brilliant. Before we go into the interview side of things, I'll describe you, and I'm sure plenty of others. There was a bit of a cultural attaché of the Geordie nation. You're very proud. You're a very proud Geordie, and we know you're a massive Newcastle United fan. And it's on that subject I just want to kick off with. I go to Rhodes every year, and when you arrive at Rhodes Airport, it's usually 70s, 80s, 90 degrees, and you have your Gatwick turntable, your Birmingham turntable, and your Newcastle turntable. And here they all are, the Geordies, and they've all got their shirts on. They've all got their Newcastle shirts on. So I go out that night for a meal, and they got their Newcastle shirts on. I go around the pool the next morning, they got the Newcastle shirts on. You go down the beach, they got the Newcastle shirts on. It's all week, and it's 90 degrees. And then you're watching the telly in December, and here they are at St James's Park, and they're all taking their shirts off. And it's freezing out. What's that all about, Steve?
I think it's just sheer strength, isn't it? From the lads up north, we can handle the cold, and I think
I walked into that, didn't I? Yeah.
I mean, the shirts things died off a little bit under the current owner. I've got to be honest. The Mike Ashley era has almost finished us up as a fan base. We before COVID, we'd lost 10,000 supporters at home. Never ever voted with our feet. People often say that Newcastle fans would turn up at St James's Park just to watch the grass grow. And that used to be true. But at the moment, there's such apathy against our owner and the lack of investment that he's put into the club in the last 14 years that we are sadly losing people. Now, we're going into a new era now, i.e., after COVID, and it's going to be interesting to see, what the future holds at St James's Park. Away from home, I'm travelling on Friday with 3,000 other Geordies down to Doncaster for a friendly. We've sold the away section out, and that's our first away game for many, many months, just like everybody else. But it's the home crowd that really concerns me. And look, the retro tops probably are something that you'll probably see at the ground more often these days than the actual top, because people just don't want to put money into Mike Ashley's pocket, and they're so sick of what's gone on. And we've all had to suffer the pandemic. It's been horrendous. However, Newcastle fans have had the torment of a multi-billion pound takeover. The Saudis who wanted to come in and buy Newcastle with the Rubens and with Amanda Staveley and PCP have been denied the right by the Premier League, and that's dragged on for the last 15 months. So it's been a horrendous time being a Newcastle fan. Not to mention Steve Bruce sitting in the dugout as manager, the worst Premier League manager on record. So for us, I know things could be worse. We could be in Sunderland's position in Division 3 or wherever they are these days. But from our perspective, you're only concerned about your own supporters, and it's been tough. It's been a tough 15 months. We just hope there's light at the end of the tunnel with this takeover, because there's two sets of legal action now going in against the Premier League. One is obviously arbitration, which has now been postponed to 2022. No date to be confirmed yet. But the CAT case, which is something which a supporter actually started off, a fan initiative, Keith Patterson from NCSL, he actually paid for that himself and set the ball rolling. The club have now taken that case on. That case will happen before the end of the year. And our hope is that Newcastle will get full disclosure of what's actually gone on and why we've been denied our takeover through that particular that case. And we feel that there's been that much skullduggery gone on by the Premier League that ultimately the takeover will get waved through. They'll look to settle out of court because of what evidence the club actually has against the Premier League. So we will wait and see. Whatever happens, the football club will still be here. We're either going to have a billionaire owner by the time the January transfer window comes round, and we'll be competing at a different end of the table, or we'll be doing what we normally do, which is flirt with relegation or possibly even get relegated and be back in the Championship before you can say Newcastle United.
Well, fair play to yourself and all the people that travelled down, because you was in London last week, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, London's my spiritual home. It's a second home. I've gone up and down on the Rattler since I was a kid, and I was back down again last weekend to do a protest with 300 Newcastle supporters in Parliament Square. We then handed a letter in to Boris Johnson at Downing Street, and then we handed a letter in at the Premier League. So it was, some people might feel as it was a waste of time, but for me, I've always been a doer, not somebody who sits back and waits for other people to do it. And I just think that going down to London, it was a visual. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of months is fans standing up against, corruption. We saw the ESL developments over the spring and summer period, where Man United fans actually invaded their own ground, where Tottenham fans walked down, and protested outside their stadium. So Newcastle fans, got themselves together and felt, well, let's get on the buses, let's get on the trains, and let's get down to London and make our voices heard. So that's what we did, and you get nothing sitting at home. I think unfortunately these days there is too much reliance on social media, in particular Twitter and Facebook, and people think that they just need to put in a new name for a protest into Twitter, set up an account, and they're going to get thousands of people at the match doing what they say. Well, that's not what happens. It's, I've been involved in protests against my club for the last 30 odd years, and I'm afraid it's still the good old fashioned way of getting round to social clubs, getting round to bars, leafleting people, getting a bit of publicity on TV and radio. And that is the only way a message gets out there. Social media plays a big part, but I'm afraid that anyone who feels that Newcastle United's fan base are all on Twitter are sadly, mistaken. And sometimes you just got to get up, get on your feet and be there. And with that comes a lot of criticism. Putting your head above the parapet gets a lot of criticism. I know you follow me on Twitter, and I have constant abuse and battles with people. But I did 18 years on the door, Frank, and I'm not bothered about somebody sitting behind a keyboard in his mum's bedroom who's going to call me a baldy nonce. It doesn't bother me. You know what I mean? The same kid wouldn't come and say it to me face. And for me, they're just trying to detract from what I'm trying to achieve. And that is a takeover for Newcastle United. And if I can help in a very small way to achieve that by rattling a few cages down at the powers that be, then I'll do that.
Well, at the end of the day, Steve, we're all football fans. We all feel passionate about our clubs, and as a fellow, say, football fan, I wish you people all the best, because you're certainly amongst you know, the top, well, what, 5 even, you know, most, well, if not higher than that, most loyal fans, you know, for what rewards you get, let's put it that way, in regards to trophies, etc. And even respect from, you know, from some of the boards that you've had over the years and some of the owners, you know.
We've not won a trophy, a domestic trophy, since 1955, the FA Cup final, in that, like Halicon days, when we won the FA Cup 3 times, 51, 52, 55. And then our last trophy, full stop. If you're obviously not going to count the meaningless trophies. The last one we won was in '69, the Fairs Cup, which doesn't even exist now. You know, against Ujpest Dozda in a 2-leg final. Since then, we've had a couple of Wembley appearances in the 70s, 74, the FA Cup final, where Liverpool humiliated us. We played Man City in a tighter game. We got beat 2-1. Dennis Stewart's overhead kick beating us that time round. And then, we had the 90s, when really Kevin Keegan's, ambitious football team deserved to win something, fell short at the final hurdle against a fantastic Man United team in the league. And then obviously had, subsequent FA Cup finals against Man United and Arsenal, where, we played the double winners and the treble winners. How unlucky can you get? We even got well walloped in the Charity Shield against Man United, and then came out and got soaked in the biggest cloudburst Wembley'd ever seen. But, other than that, the only other trip to Wembley we had was under Bobby Robson. We narrowly lost the semi-final against Chelsea. And then, of course, we went down and had a semi-final in the UEFA Cup. Marseille beat us with a young Drogba, basically finishing our dreams. And then we went a few days later down to Cardiff, when Wembley was out of bounds for semi-finals, and we got humiliated down there as well. So, look, we've had days out at Wembley, but other than that, we've had nothing but relegations and promotions. And the promotions have been great. I mean, I'm lucky. I saw 83, 84. I saw Keegan, Waddle and Beardsley play for Newcastle, and Newcastle finished third before the playoffs and went up, with Chelsea that year, and Sheffield Wednesday. And then, I've seen subsequent promotions under different managers. Chris Hughton was a great one because it was completely unexpected. And Rafa Benitez in more recent times, of course, which, was great and slightly different for me, because I was, working for Rafa. I wasn't working for the club, but I was working for Rafa for the 3 years that he was on Tyneside. So there's been a lot of ups, but been more downs. And I guess as a Newcastle fan at the moment, all I really have to hang on to is Derby wins against Sunderland, beating Man United 5-0 live on Sky, and beating Barcelona in the Tino Asprilla hat-trick 3-2 in the Champions League. You can point to a few other games as well, like, going away on European journeys, which are always exciting, and getting results where you don't expect them. But ultimately, that's all we've got. Yeah. A lot more than some other football fans, Frank, but a lot less than a club of Newcastle size and stature, and with a fan base like we have, I feel deserves anyway.
I get a feeling that Matt the Hat is a bit like me, and thinking, thank God he hasn't mentioned a certain game where you beat a certain team by quite a large score. I'm not gonna upset the host. Was it 5? I can't remember. Was it 6? was it 5-1 or was it 6-1? I can't remember now. I can't remember either. I think it was 6-1. I've got an horrible feeling it might have been 6. 5-1. There we go. Yeah, we're being told it was. Yeah, we're being told it was 5-1. Oh, 6-1. Yeah, 6-1. It was 6. No, he's doing 5. Oh, he was doing 5 and 1-1. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, we just had an off day that day. It was just an off day. Tottenham had the wrong boots on that day. To be honest with Spurs, it's a funny old game between Newcastle and Spurs. I mean, one cracking story I can give you is I was quite good friends with Paul Gascoigne when he grew up, only through a complete fluke. He lived in the same area as me, lived in Gateshead. I actually missed out on a ticket for an FA Cup 5th round game against Wimbledon, and I was told by some of my mates that Gazza's number was in the phone book. So I rang up these numbers in the phone book and eventually got the right one. And I was so excited. I said, is that Paul? He goes, yeah, who is it? I said, it's Steve. I missed out on a ticket for the match. He says, well, meet us at the club shop up at St James's Park, 12:30 on match day, and I'll sort you out. Sure enough, that day I went up, I got me, I stood outside the club shop. Gazza turns up in his car, pulls in, and there's a group of lads standing next to us, and Gazza sorted us all out with tickets. And
I watched him, in his very early days, but when he left, it was a real, kick in the nuts for Newcastle fans. We'd lost Waddle to Tottenham, we'd lost Beardsley to Liverpool, then we lost Gaza. Newcastle were a selling club, they weren't a buying club. And for me, it was a great disappointment. But I guess that's where my entrepreneurial skills came in, because you might remember that Gaza's debut for Spurs was, of course, at St James's Park on the opening day of the season. And I went out and, knowing Gaza likes Mars bars, I decided to treat Gaza on the day by buying a box of 48 Mars bars from the local cash and carry, sticking them in the freezer, and then selling them outside the Gallagher end on the day of his debut for Spurs. So, of course, when Gaza came to take the corner at the Gallagher end, I'd sold out of my box of Mars bars, and Gaza got pelted with loads of Mars bars when he took the corner. So I have since confessed this to Paul. Happy memories of Spurs games. And I think we beat Spurs 7-1 under Keegan, and that was bizarre. We beat Spurs 7-1 at home. That was in the days of Shearer and Ferdinand. And then 2 weeks later, Keegan had gone. He fell out with the owner.
We might have cut that. We might have cut that bit out. we gave you the 6-1. I didn't know I could remember the 7-1.
I also remember the FA Cup game you beat us in, where we preempted Hillsborough. I think it was 85. You beat us 1-0, and I think that was a 5th round FA Cup game. And I was on
Clive Allen, I think, was it? I think Clive Allen scored that.
I was on the away end that day, and I was crushed. And that was in the days of fences. And great game, just a very uncomfortable game. But got to be honest, it's always a ground I've enjoyed coming to. I've got a lot of good friends, obviously in London. Pandy Carusi is one of them, who works for Guy Ritchie and Guy Ritchie's pub down in London these days. Good friend of Freddie Foreman as well, and he's a big Spurs fan. So we always have a bit of banter every season when games are going to get played between Newcastle and Spurs.
Right. Let's go back to the younger Steve, shall we? You're growing up in Newcastle, and I'll start off with. Your letter writing, we'll call it. You wrote to, was it both or one of the two you wrote to?
Yeah, I wrote to the Crays. I passed my English exam studying a book called Profession of Violence by John Pearson. And essentially, I'd decided to write to Ronnie and Reggie Craig in prison. I'd seen, these two gangsters on the TV news when I was 10 years of age that clearly left an impression, going to their mother's funeral in 1982. My parents were making a big fuss about it. So something clearly stuck in my mind. And I was out on the Quayside Market on a Sunday morning, saw the copy of the book, the Crays looking up at us. I bought the book, and my English teacher allowed me to study it as part of my curriculum. I really enjoyed the book, loved it, loved the glamour, loved the nightclubs, loved the celebrities. I'd almost separated all of that from the violence and the murder. I was just, the glamour of these two guys wearing suits. One had a really beautiful woman on his arm, fast cars, all part of a gang, nightclubs, boxing. It was all something a young Geordie lad was easily influenced by. And I just decided after passing my English exam, studying the book, that I would write to the Crays. So I wrote to Ronnie Craig and I wrote to Reggie Craig. Ronnie was in Broadmoor, Reggie was in Gartree. And obviously, because they had a lot of time on their hands, they wrote back. And I've got to be honest, I was over the moon. Getting this letter back from Reggie Craig, dear Steve, thanks for writing a letter. We can't keep up our correspondence, but, thanks for your support. I've got a new book out. Would you mind buying this book? That was it. And Ron Craig was very similar. We can't keep up our correspondence, but thanks for writing, much appreciated. Thanks for your support. And that story would have ended there had it not been for a woman's magazine called Take a Break that my mum brought back to home about 6 months later, which had an article in about a young guy called Brad Lane, who was Reggie Craig's adopted son. He clearly wasn't his adopted son. He was only a young kid. But he was dressed in a suit. He seemed to have a load of Craig memorabilia in his bedroom, and his mum and him were talking in this article about visiting Reggie Craig. So they lived in Doncaster, and I had a friend in Scunthorpe, Steve Cross, who I was doing a bit of work with on a football fanzine at the time. And he was a Newcastle fan. And I used to go down and spend like a few days with him and, have a few nights out, etc. So I wrote to Brad and Kim. Kim was Brad's mother, and just, said, look, I passed my English exam at school. I wrote to your dad. He wrote back and, be nice to hear from you. back in the days of, letter writing before mobile phones. And I didn't get a reply for about 3 or 4 months. And then suddenly a letter landed at the door, a couple of stats of photos of the Crays I'd never seen, a nice letter from Brad and Kim, and just said, if you're ever down in Doncaster, give us a shout. So that's what I did. I was on a sabbatical down to see Stephen Scunthorpe. I jumped on the train one day to go to Doncaster, and I met Brad and Kim. I sorted it out, I had a meeting with them. And it was a fascinating meeting because, I went in, I had a cup of tea, had a sandwich, had a chat, and then the phone rang. And when the phone rang, Brad ran straight to the phone and went, it's Dad, it's Dad. And of course, he picked the phone up and Reggie Craig was on the phone. Mm. So for me, I sat and just watched him as he chatted away. Kim then took the phone, had a chat, and then Kim turned to me and said, Steve, would you like to speak to Reg? And that was my very first conversation with Reggie Craig. He was on the other end of the phone and he just said, hello, is that Steve from Newcastle? And I was like, wow, I was blown away. Here's me speaking to this guy I've read a book about. And that was the start of my journey, I would say, because ultimately he wanted to see me. He wanted me to visit. So within 2 weeks, I was cleared to go down to Gartree Prison. I went down to Doncaster, jumped in the car with Kim and Brad, and I was on my way to Market Harbour to Gartree Prison, maximum security, to visit Reggie Craig.
Mm. How old was you then, Steve?
I just left school, so I was just turning 17 at the time, which, was quite a young age, I guess. My mum had spoken to me about going. She encouraged it. My dad wasn't happy at all that I was going to visit a murderer in prison. But my mum was of the mindset, well, he's very headstrong, Stephen. If you say no, he's going to try and do it anyway. So, let him do it. It might just be a phase he's going through. Right. The visit itself was, I remember it quite clearly. I remember a little bit of nervousness and foreboding about going to prison. I'd never been before, but it was a big maximum security prison. I remember walking in and, handing the paper VO in. I remember, handing in some stuff to trainers and T-shirts, which Reg had requested. And then Kim getting a bag back of Reg's old stuff because you would have to exchange stuff at the time. She took that back to the car. Then we waited for our number to be called out. Then we went through a selection of security doors. We then got checked at a security point, searched, made sure we weren't taking any contraband in. To be fair, it wasn't very strict back in those days. And then we went through a courtyard and across a gravel path through a load of fenced off areas until we got taken into a big canteen area. We walked in and I just remember it was a hot sunny day. I remember it being very warm in there and it being very noisy because it was peak summer holiday period time, a bit like it is now. And it was just a massive families sitting, having visits with different prisoners. Kim went straight off to the canteen on the right. Me and Brad sat at the allocated table, 3 chairs on one side, 1 on the other. And we just waited. Kim came back over with like a lot of orange juices and crisps and chocolate, etc. And then the door opened at the far end and there was this big screw walks through with a small but well-built, diminutive grey-haired fella. And I recognised Reg straight away. He came up, ruffled Brad's hair, gave him a cuddle. It was just like any father-son kind of relationship. Gave Kim a kiss. And then he shook my hand. And that was my first meeting with, the infamous Reggie Craig.
Mm-hmm. So that must have been a bit of a surreal moment for you, that then, considering that had evolved from reading a book. And
very surreal.
Standing there shaking hands with him. Oh.
Very surreal to shake Reggie Craig's hand. Looking back on it, it's something which I certainly don't regret doing it. But it was the beginning of a friendship which lasted 10 years, and a friendship which was beneficial for him, but also beneficial for me. And I didn't go down with any premeditated ideas. I was 17 going on 18. I wasn't going down there, thinking, right, what can I do with Reggie Craig? I was just interested in meeting this guy who I'd read so much about. But ultimately, Reg, marked my card about how things were going to go from the start. He pulled out a load of paper from his top pocket. He'd written loads of notes. He was telling Kim he wanted her to ring this person. He wanted those books to ship to that person. Had she been paid for this? Can you chase this person up? Reg was doing business from in prison, and it was quite clear that he was still very money motivated. He did have time to speak to me. We chatted about football. He was, wanting to talk about Arsenal. I was obviously a Newcastle fan. He told us that he played football in jail at the time, and he's physically very fit. He just broken the record for bench press in Gartree at that time, so it tells you how strong he was. At the end of the visit, he just said, "Look," he said, "I want you to do me a favour. I've had a smashing visit. I'd like you to go and see Ron." Ronnie Craig, of course, wasn't in prison. He was in Broadmoor Hospital, and that was a different kettle of fish altogether. So I went back home. It was a long day, long journey. Got back home. My mum was wanting to know all about it. My dad wasn't interested whatsoever. But then I dropped the bombshell that Reg wanted us to go and see his brother, Ronnie, in Broadmoor. So even my mum was a bit nervous about that, it has to be said, because of the situation that Ron had found himself in. She explained, because she'd worked in mental health and worked on those kind of wards, what it was going to be like, what to expect. Maybe I would want to reconsider. But I said, no. I said, I promised Reg I would go down to see him, and I will. So that was it. A couple of weeks later, I was off to Crowthorne in Berkshire to go and see Ronnie Craig in Broadmoor. And travelling down there was a lot more difficult, because Brad and Kim, basically had set off a day earlier. They were going to see somebody else. So I had to go on the train, and it was a long, long journey back in those days. I mean, it would be a long journey now, but not as long as it was then. And I had to set off from Newcastle at 6 a.m, get down to King's Cross, which at the time was around about 4.5 to 5 hour journey. I then had to get a train from King's Cross to Reading, and then I had to get a train from Reading to Crowthorne in Berkshire, So then once you got to Crowthorne, you had to get a taxi. So it was a busy, it was a long, long day. Luckily, no delays on my way down. Got to Broadmoor about half an hour before Brad and Kim, and met them there, and then we went in. And fascinating place to go to when I look back. I wish I could have gone in my later years, but I still have a fairly good recollection of arriving. I've got a photograph of me there. I had a suit on. I thought, I'd worn a suit to go and see Reg. I wanted to be respectful wearing a suit to go and see these guys. That was the image that they portrayed, and I just felt it was only right. And we went in on the visit. Again, similar, handing in stuff. Reg obviously was always trainers and clothes, etc. Whereas Ron, you would always drop in some cigarettes. He used to have 200 John Player specials. And then, once your number was called, you walked through the Victorian courtyard across to where the wards were, and then you were literally on hospital wards. And I remember walking down the ward and just noticing on the left that there was doors which were closed, but the doors had names on. And Ronnie Craig's ward was Somerset Ward at the time, and we were walking down Somerset Ward towards the visiting room. The visiting room was a theatre, a big old theatre stage and red flock curtains, and then all just chairs and tables in the visiting room, and a canteen to the far right. At the very far end was a big conservatory with the doors open leading into the garden, and you had to book a separate, if you wanted to go outside, you would have to book that in. So we were sitting inside the visiting room. It didn't take long for Kim to go off and get the refreshments and then Ron to appear, and it was so different. Whereas Reg had been in standard prison issue blue and white shirt, jeans, and a pair of trainers, Ron turned in a suit that had been sent in from Savile Row, black pinstripe suit. He had a white shirt on with RK sewed into his pocket. He had a red silk tie on with a gold tie pin. He had a pair of Gucci shoes on, and he had a pinky ring which was worth about $2,000, and gold horn-rimmed glasses. His hair was slicked back, a bit of grey in it, but still a bit of black. And he just walked over and, didn't give Brad a hug. He shook Brad's hand, gave Kim a kiss, and then came to me and just, again, you must be Steve from Newcastle. Put his hand out, strong, bony grip. I think the one thing I realised with Ron was his eyes. He had very black, piercing eyes. And I wouldn't say there was menace on the visit. There was just it was a different person. You could tell he was clearly not all there and on medication, but very polite, very very courteous. Wouldn't sit down till Kim sat down, and then he sat down, and he then clicked his fingers, and as he clicked his fingers, the nurse came over and lit his cigarette. had a cigarette because he wasn't allowed to have a lighter, lit his cigarette. So he just starts chain smoking, and he chain smoked his way through 25, 30 cigarettes on that first visit. Very quietly spoken, as was Reg. And the very first thing he did was put his hand like across on my knee, and he just goes, "You don't mind that I'm bisexual, do you, Steve?" And I laughed and I went, "Well, I'm not bisexual, so," I said, I'm not gonna say anything about anybody else. It's, just please know that that's not the way. I'm not that way inclined. And I just laughed. It was his sense of humour. And towards the end of the visit, he started going on about when he got out, he would take us on a cruise. Would I like to go on a cruise? And I was only 17. I was naive to what a cruise meant to a bisexual or gay man, and I went, yeah, that would be great. And as you do. So anyway, about 4 days later after the visit, I'm at home and there's a big thud at the letterbox, and my mum shouts up, "Stephen, you've got some post." And I ran downstairs, and my mum hands us this envelope, and it's the familiar scroll because neither of the twins were very neat writers. And I open it up, and inside there's a brochure. I've still got it to this day, and it's a brochure for Hispanic cruises with a note in from Ron saying, "Looking forward to the cruise, Steve." I never went on that cruise with Ron.
Never got your cruise, did you?
I'm pleased to say. But what I did do is when Ron passed away, and I mean, obviously I was security for Ron's funeral. I was Charlie Cray's minder on that day. Dave Courtney made me part of the security team that day. But I did take a wreath down, and I put a cruise ship on it with Ron on the side, which it was a joke to me by that time. I'd got what the cruise was all about. But yeah, fascinating times, fascinating memories, and obviously I guess I'm a keeper of the Cray Flame to a degree these days. I've done documentaries, many documentaries now on TV. Just done something with Michael Caine for Audible. And now, I've probably written about 6 or 7 books on the Crays, and it's something which who could have ever imagined that a young boy who would walk, pick up a book at a market, would read it about infamous characters, would end up walking through the book, meeting all the characters and coming out the other side and eventually writing books themselves. It's a strange story.
Mm. What did you do when you left school, Steve? What sort of employment did you have?
I always wanted to be an actor. I was an actor from the age of 7. I played King Canute in a school play. My mum and dad thought I was great, and they could see something in me. And I was up against it because the junior school that I went to, I couldn't read and write after 2 years at school, and that was because the school, if Ofsted had been around now, back in those days, the school would have been closed down and condemned, and these problems would have been highlighted. But there was nobody actually going in and checking up on schools, so I was hastily removed from state school, and my mum and dad put us into private school. So I ended up in private school, and I managed to claw things back, but wasn't the greatest of starts for me. And acting was a way that they saw of, maybe getting me back on the right track. They put us in for elocution lessons as well. The mindset was that if I could talk properly and have a conversation, that I would go a long way. So that was their mindset. Cost them money, of course, putting us into private education, but the acting was something I enjoyed. I enjoyed the elocution. I enjoyed the poetry recital stuff because it was learning words. And I ended up going to a place called the People's Theatre when I was 11 years of age. I was there till I was 18, working alongside people like Tom Goodman Hill, who's done a lot of feature films over the years and does a lot of things like Downton, etc. Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys, another one who was at that particular place. And it was a Saturday morning theatre club. I was dead lucky. It opened a few new horizons for me. I toured America when I was 13, doing Under Milk Wood. I did 3 weeks in America as a 13-year-old without my parents. I did in New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey, which was fascinating. And then when I was 16, I did Russia. Did a tour to Russia, playing the Artful Dodger, which again in Oliver, which was fantastic. I just, didn't stick in at school because I always wanted to be an actor. When I left school, I went to college. And I went in to do the very first year BTEC diploma at Newcastle College, and I was all set to continue. But I did a pantomime. I played a dame at 17 in a touring pantomime, and unfortunately, I lost I lost the will to live doing it, really, because I did 60 shows in 3 weeks, sometimes doing 3 shows a day, putting the set up, doing a 2-hour performance, and then taking the set down and moving on to the next venue. It was like slave labour for a 17-year-old. It really, really deflated me. And I just thought, if this is acting, I can stick it. So I did. I walked off the course, and I walked away from my dream of being an actor. I thought, if that's acting, I don't want to do it. And the only thing I had to fall back on, because I only left school with three GCSEs, 2 of which were English, the other geography. The only thing I had to fall back on was the post office, which, of course, my grandparents ran in Gateshead. I had a Saturday job and a Sunday job working in the newsagent side of it with my dad. We used to run the newsagents on a Saturday and Sunday, and I would go out and deliver the papers if the paper boy didn't turn up. And from there, really, it became obvious that the only choice I had was to learn how to work the post office and, work in there. So that's what I did. At that time, my grandparents were looking to retire. My dad, made a massive sacrifice. He said that he would purchase the post office with me or for me on behalf of, of his parents. And that's what he did. But I would have to pay him back. So I would literally have to work for nothing until I cleared the debt. And that's what I did. I grafted in a post office, and I did it for 10 years. I became the youngest sub postmaster in the UK when I turned 21. My dad transferred 99% of the business to me because I'd paid off most of the money that I'd borrowed. And I was now a business owner. I had the post office, I had the news agents, but to be honest, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I always felt I wanted something else. I mean, my granddad did 38 years in the post office. I think he was hoping I would do the same, but it wasn't enough for a young lad who, wanted to get out and about and, experience life and experience the world. And I was starting to go out with my mates. I was playing Sunday League football. I was going to Newcastle's games, home and away. But I was also, going out on the town and going down the big market. And this is where my life really took a bit of a change because...
Did you ever get robbed, Steve?
I did once, yes.
Did it ever get turned over?
1995, 8th of July. I'll never forget it. It was an armed robbery. Not guns. Happy to say it was a big axe and a knife. They came into the post office just after the cash had been delivered. They had a grate off the drains, a drain cover. They came running into the post office. At the time, the female member of staff was on the newsagent side and I was behind the post office guard. And the money just been dropped off. I hadn't had time to put it in a safe because I was talking to a customer. The robbers struck lucky. They came in through the drain cover, through the guard, swiped the money, and they were off. And that was it. So they got a substantial amount. And for me, I was really, really annoyed because the post office came down. The first thing, when we rang in and told them what had happened, the first thing they asked was how much did they get? And I just knew that was the beginning and the end for me with the post office because I thought, you should be asking if anybody. You should be asking if anybody's been hurt.
I was just going to say no concern with the staff did.
Oh, none whatsoever. And of course, I was chief suspect as well because of the bloody connection with the Craze. I'm all over the newspapers by this point, writing to the Craze, and they're fingerprinting me. And I'm the one standing behind the guard, thinking, is this for real? But yeah, look, the post office was a means to an end at that time. But on a night out down the big market, there was a bar called Masters, which always seemed to be a great place to start and was always a great place to end the night. And you would always be in there. The footballers would get in. It was always a great place. But ultimately, it was also a place for violence. And what would often happen is my friends at the end of the night would end up in the middle of it, not causing it. Somebody would spill a drink, bloke would turn round, there'd be a fight. I'd end up in the middle pulling my mates off instead of getting involved in the fights. And Gary, the head doorman, one night came up to us at Christmas and said, "You don't fancy doing a few shifts on the door, do you, Steve?" And I went, "Me?" And he goes, Yeah. He says, "I've been watching you over the last 6 months." He says, "And you don't cause any trouble." He says, "I've watched you." He says, "And you don't let trouble kick off." He says, "I think you'd be ideal." And I went, "Nah, it's not for me." Like, he went, "Well, I'll make it worth your while." He says, "One of the doormen's off with a broken arm." He says, "It's Christmas coming up." He says, "I'll give you four shifts, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday." He says, "And it's 25 quid an hour." I went, "Phew." I'm not going to knock that back. And he says, we'll give you a share of the bucket as well, even though you haven't worked all year, which is, of course, what doorman used to put on the door on a night over the Christmas. And that was it. Sold to the man with a bald head. So I basically went down for my first shift the following Thursday. I had to go and buy a couple of white shirts, and I already had a black suit and black shoes. Went down there, got there for 7 o'clock, showed us around the bar. Proper old-fashioned, Frank, you'll appreciate this. Because it had the light system in, so like the lights up there for different areas of the bar, like the traffic light system, red, green, amber, and that was front bar, that was middle bar, that was back bar. I was going to be allocated the back fire exit and the back door, which is where the stairs were, which was busy, which is also where like the VIPs would sneak in on a night time, and I'd get a chance to make a little earner charging them. But that was it. It was great. But we got there the very first night. And the head doorman and me walked in, and after he'd shown us around the bar, the manager comes down. He says, would you mind like starting about an hour later? He says, there's nobody in. It's pointless you being here, and I don't really want to pay the 2 years for sitting around doing nothing. Now, Gary says, yeah, no problem. He says, we'll go for a pint. So he took us down to the Bridge Hotel, which is, just 2 minutes walk from where Masters used to be. It's now Tup in Newcastle. And we got down to the Bridge. And as you do as the newbie, you're trying to impress. 6 pints of Guinness later in an hour, I'm staggering back up to the bar for my first shift, feeling bloated, feeling sick, and needing to go to the toilet. And it was a tough night that way. It was like an oven in the bar. I was backwards and forwards to the toilet, pissing like a horse, basically. And I never drank again. It was a valuable lesson as a doorman. Never drink on your shift. And I know a lot of people used to, and a lot of people maybe still do. But for me, it was a valuable lesson. And I never drank again before I went to work on a shift. There was violence. There was a lot of trouble in that bar. But it was a great team. And I had 2 great door teams in my time that I would always say. That one at Masters was probably one of the best. And the one at Chase that I worked with was fantastic. I was the head doorman, of course, by that stage. But at that meeting with Gary at Masters, I would never have thought when he asked me to be a doorman that I would, give up 18 years of my life for that job. But it's a job that I loved. And it brought us some fantastic experiences, not just in Newcastle. I worked in London. I worked at the Ministry of Sound. And I also worked at Eden and Ibiza. I did a summer in Ibiza, which is fantastic as well. So, that as well as a bit of close protection stuff, looking after celebrities in Newcastle, the likes of Robbie Williams and Lady Gaga, Jordan, various people who've come on book tours over the years, like Andy McNabb and Michael Parkinson, you name it. I've looked after some big names over the years in Newcastle. So it's given us a lot of happy tales and a lot of good memories. But Gary, I always want to say a thank you to him for doing that, and giving us the opportunity.
Yeah. When did you start a kind of a business arrangement with the Craigs in regards to the merchandise, etc.?
That was strange, really, because I, at the time, obviously was leaving. Was left school. The drama had collapsed, and I was now in the post office. But as a little sideline, I was also making T-shirts, a bit like this one I've got on now, just doing T-shirts with footballers on, Malcolm MacDonald, Supermac, or Keegan or Waddle or Beardsley or Gaza, doing retro shirts, T-shirts. We were, we're making a few quid, me and my mate Mark, from those T-shirts. And I just dropped in a letter to Reg. How about me doing a T-shirt with a craze on? And Reg wrote back, I like the idea. What did you have in mind? So I told him, why not use the front cover of Professional Violence, the book that I read, and just have Professional Violence over the top of it and have your 2 heads. So Reg liked the idea. We came to an agreement. I would take the risk. I would get the T-shirts printed, and would split it 70-30, the profit. 70% of them, 30% of me. And which sounds like a bad deal, but when you think about it, it was 35% for Reg, 35% for Ron, 30% for me, but I'm taking all the risk. Yeah. I did have an outlet, a shop called Pet Sounds in Newcastle, which was like a second-hand record shop. And they were doing T-shirts. They were doing our football T-shirts. So we started off with a relatively small order. They took 10. We knocked up 10 T-shirts. Obviously pinged a couple to Ron and Reg to have a look at. They liked them. And, we were surprised at how quickly it took off. Those 10 went in the first couple of days. So then they took some for their other stores. And before we knew it, we were struggling to keep up with the demand. On top of that, Reg was averaging 400 letters a week at this point. The film had come out. He was like a star himself. People were writing to him. And I said to Reg, I said, look, my dad at that time was working in the computer industry, and he'd started making spreadsheets and spread lists, and contacts were being added to lists. And he was saying a database is probably the best way forward, Steve, if you're going to do this. He says, because if Reg has got another book to come out, or you bring another T-shirt out, you can contact these people direct, send them a letter or give them a ring. And that's what we did. We created the Craig's first database, me and my dad. And Reg was over the moon. It was, reams and reams of paper with all these names, addresses, and contacts. Suddenly, it was, to him, it was like ka-ching. You could see them. You could see the money signs in his eyes. T-shirts went through the roof. Safe to say, we made about a six-figure sum. In the turnover for him on T-shirts, about £100,000 in T-shirts overall in the first year. And obviously for them, that meant a nice 70 grand earner. But for me, turning 18 in Newcastle with my partner in crime, Mark, we turned over some decent money as well for young kids. So it was a big investment, meant I could get on the property ladder. And from my perspective, it was, it was good business. But we ended up in an issue when we were trying to expand further south. We got blacklisted from a couple of shops because they said they already had T-shirts. We couldn't understand why. Eventually, I was pointed to a shop down in Croydon, an antique shop, which I had to ring on a Wednesday afternoon to speak to the guy who was doing these T-shirts to see if we could come to some kind of understanding, because clearly Ron and Reg weren't happy about this particular situation that had developed. But when I spoke to this guy in Croydon at 2:00 on the Wednesday, I said, hi, it's Steve Wraith. I'm ringing on behalf of Ronnie and Reggie Craig. I'm doing T-shirts. We want to put some T-shirts down there. We've been told you're the man to speak to. You're already doing T-shirts down there. And he says, he goes, yeah. He says, well, I'm Charlie Craig. And I was like, Charlie Craig making a few quid and not telling his brothers. And it's something which I became quite used to over the years. But yeah, I had to feed that back to Ron and Reg. Needless to say, they weren't happy. The letters that I've still got to this day show how comical it became then. For the next year, they called him Mr. X. I've actually got a tape of Reg, which he asked me to stick out to the press at one point to say that his business matters and Charlie's were not connected. And it was farcical. It was like they fell out majorly. And it was sadly because of me notifying them that, this was the man who was putting a stop to their T-shirts down south. But that was just one of a load of things which happened between the twins and Charlie over the years. But, here's me stuck in the middle of it.
Yeah. At what point, Steve, did you get into the book world even more? Because you're associated, you've collaborated, it's the word I'm looking for, with so many books now. When did that become apparent to you that you had a flair for that? You had a business brain for that.
I guess it was probably as time passed on. I mean, the Craigs, obviously Ron Craig died in 95. That was when I decided to write my first book, because I was part of the funeral cortege. I was Charlie's minder on the day. I still can't believe that I went over the Bow flyover in the 8th car at that funeral and saw workmen stop their business and have the hard hats held down there for a murderer. And I think that was a wake-up call for me. I was, by this stage, I was 23 years of age, and I'm sitting looking after Charlie Craig and Reg Craig, and Charlie and I spoke at English's funeral parlour. We went in to see Ron's body together. I'm slap bang in the middle of this story now. I'm part of the story. I'm not reading a book now. I'm part of it. But that made me think, I'm going to write my own book. I'd be stupid if I didn't. And I threw the idea to Reg, I threw the idea to Charlie. They said it was a great idea. So they encouraged me to do it, but I'd never written a book before. So whilst working on the door and still at this time working in the post office, and by this time writing the very first Newcastle United fanzine, the Mighty Quinn, which then became the number 9, and selling that outside the ground, and as well as doing the T-shirts, I started writing a book. And I hand wrote it. I've still actually got the manuscript to this day, but I hand wrote it on A4 paper in biro. And it took us from start to finish 5 years to write that book. The reason it took 5 years is because the story wasn't over. All the early stuff was easy to write, but as we know, Ron had passed away in 95. Reg and Charlie didn't pass away until 2000. And there was so much more to write. And that 5 years obviously saw Reg get married again. It saw Reg distance himself from old pals to try and get parole. And it also saw Charlie get, set up by the police in an entrapment where, they give him a death sentence. So from my perspective, all of that was going to go in the book. Reg died before I'd finished the book, but Charlie didn't. I managed to send Charlie a copy of the manuscript into Franklin Prison because he obviously got a 10 and a 12 to run concurrently for a £78 million drugs bust. And he loved it. He loved the book and he wished us all the best with it. 3 months later, he'd passed away himself. The book itself didn't come out until 2002, but it was published locally in Newcastle, but it did very well. Did over 20,000 copies. And for me, that was when I realised I could probably write more books, but it took a while for me to even contemplate writing another book. And it took 5 years to write that one. And I didn't have the urgency to do it. My life was taking different twists and turns on a personal level as well as on a professional level. But I knew I would go back to writing at some point. I just wasn't sure when. But as you say, I met other people. I met other characters, the twins and Charlie in particular, because Charlie was a free man for most of the time that I knew him. Introduced me to so many people. Charlie introduced me to Tony Lambriano. He introduced me to Freddie Foreman, who then in turn introduced me to Bruce Reynolds, Joe Pyle Sr., Tommy Wisby. They then introduced me to other people that they knew, and it just became a monotonous, like a roller coaster ride, really, of different people. Howard Marks, became a good friend, and obviously I knew Dave Courtney, from the security at the funeral, and we became good friends. And it was more and more people, Lenny McLean, Roy Shaw, and all these different faces who were at different events. And yeah, it was strange. And eventually Charlie Bronson, who's now Charlie Salvador, who again was introduced to me, via this particular, group of people. And it's something which I always have to, I often pinch myself and look at it and go, did this really happen? But yeah, it did. And I've never planned anything. I've just embraced it. And, I've always been myself. I don't go into these circumstances of these people and say, oh, I'm Steve, I run Newcastle, or I'm Steve Wraith, I'm a gangster. What can we do together? Because I'm not. I've just gone to speak to these people as Steve Wraith, tell them who I am, what I do. And, sometimes it's been, I'm Steve who's got a post office, or Steve who's got, Steve who's working on the door, or Steve who wants to be an actor. But it's the same Steve Wraith, just different jobs, different circumstances, different times.
You mentioned Englishes there, the funeral directors. I actually passed there on Saturday, and Police's, because it's part of Mickey Goldtooth's gangster tours, and I went on one a few months ago, and we struck up a conversation, and he, I'd explained that I'd done a bit of time with Charlie back in '93 in Winston Green, and told him a few stories, and he basically said, "Do you feel like coming along and sharing some of those stories?" And so a couple of weeks later, I did, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, if I'm honest. And I did write to Charlie. I made a point of writing to Charlie, and to explain him what I was doing. And he seemed quite comfortable. That wished me all the best. So that was the seal of approval that I needed, And he asked me to come. He asked me to come back, and I just did one Saturday. Funny enough, and of course, the bus is absolutely covered in pictures of the Craigs, and you get the story of the Craigs, obviously Valence Road and, the Marquis of Cornwallis and, various focal points as you go along. And as I say, we did pass Englishes where I was, I think, reliably informed that the flowers at the funeral never did get paid for, and apparently nor did the local florist. So
one last crime committed by the Craig.
Well, exactly. But I've seen the draw that's still there, the fascination.
And it'll continue, Frank, because of the films, I mean, there's been so many films now about the craze and documentaries. BritBox have just done the latest 3-parter, which I was involved in. And as I say, Michael Caine doing this Audible program about gangs and the craze were the first one that he does, which I was part of. And, ultimately there was always going to be a fascination about the craze. It's never going to change. It's never going to alter. And that's down to the way that they were publicised and the way they publicised themselves. They were great self-publicists. David Bailey's photographs, were part of his Magic Box book and became synonymous along with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And then, Francis and Reg get married and David Bailey's the wedding photographer. So those photographs are, it's always going to be something which is mentioned, because the 60s is an era that we in Britain always look back on with an immense amount of pride and interest. So the craze will always be part of that.
Yeah. When did you become more involved in the boxing promotion?
Boxing promotion was interesting because obviously I had an interest in boxing from a young age. I used to go along to a gym in Gateshead, which Glenn McCrory used to train at, obviously a world champion in these parts. Billy Hardy, another great fighter from up here, used to train there, and a few other faces. And I used to just go in for the circuit training. They did get us in for some sparring one day because of my height and my size, but it wasn't for me. I thought I was doing quite well until the kid I was sparring with chucked a big right-hander straight through me defence and popped us on the nose. I saw butterflies, didn't go down, but I just thought, boxing's not for me. But I was always a fan of it, loved it. Lucky to grow up in such a great era of the heavyweight division coming alive with Tyson's emergence, and then obviously the middleweights with the likes of Ben, Collins, Eubank, Watson. That era was fantastic. So for anyone who had an interest in boxing, for that era, live through that era, was great. And the emergence of TV and Sky and stuff like that as well, which meant we had a chance to watch these great fights. Of course, terrestrial TV as well, like ITV had the great boxing nights on. I think a lot of the Ben Eubank stuff was on TV. You didn't have to pay for it. Really lucky. But the promotion side of it came really as a bit of a fluke. The Sayers family in Newcastle's cousin, Phil Riley, approached me. He's a travelling man, lived down in Blackpool, and they had set up a thing called the European Boxing Federation, which was unlicensed fighting. And they said, we would like to set a show up in Newcastle. We've been told you're the man to get involved with. And I said, well, I'm a boxing fan, but I've never put a boxing show on. And they said, well, look, we'll help you put it on. Don't worry about that. We just need somebody to promote it, somebody to try and get the fighters in. Do you fancy giving it a shot? So that's what I did. 7 years later, 38 shows later, I'd thoroughly enjoyed it, loved it. And, I put some great shows on, discovered some great fighters. I mean, my very first fight night was at a place called Felon Social Club in Gateshead, and I had John Davison fighting his very final fight. And I mean, John again is a legend in these parts. So to stage that was fantastic. But I had, Michael Gomez boxed on one of my shows. We had Larry Holmes turn up and do like the halftime entertainment at one of the shows. So it was fantastic. But unfortunately, in the unlicensed game, I ended up with copycats, people who were trying to steal me fighters, people who were trying to undercut me. And it became, I've always been quite good at knowing when to get out of something and walk away. I know when I've given it me all, and I know when I can't go any further, and I know when it's time to get out. And that's what I did with the unlicensed. And because I was a fan of the pro game, I decided to put myself up for my professional license. And I didn't have the money to pay for the license, but somebody was kind enough to put the money forward. I said I would pay them back within 3 years, which I did. It was 10 grand, which you've got to level with a board. And that's what I've done for the last 10 years. I've been a professional boxing promoter for for the last 7 years, I've been a professional boxing manager, and it's been good. You know, I've again put me all into it. I think the boxing community up here were a little sceptical about me at first, especially coming from the unlicensed. But you know, there's not as much politics in the local boxing game as there used to be. I work quite heavily with Phil Jeffries, who's been going a little bit longer than me, from Sunderland, and we work together. And the shows we put on are good. We've got a lot of fighters up here between us, and you know, with the hard work and effort that we've put in, you know, we managed to get Eddie Hearn to come up here. We saw the rise of Lewis Ritson. We staged Joshua, one of Joshua's fights here. We did the undercard for that. So in a short space of time, we've probably reignited Newcastle, because Newcastle was suffering a lot as a boxing hotbed, and the Northeast in general is in a good place at the moment. We've got people, you know, fighting for English titles, people on the cusp of world titles, and it's you know, back to where it used to be, probably back in the 60s. It had a really good heyday in the 60s, but I enjoy it. I don't make money from it. You can't make money from the pro game. I guess my biggest disappointment at the minute is that after COVID, Robert Smith at the boxing board is doing very little to help the small hall promoters. They're still insisting on lateral flow tests and COVID restrictions, and that's affecting us. We can't put shows on because of that. So we're just hoping that sooner rather than later, those COVID restrictions are lifted at the small hall shows and we can get back to doing what we do best.
Yeah. I discovered at an early age that boxing wasn't for me. I like the idea of punching the other fella, but when I was getting punched back, I thought, no, stuff that for a lot. That's not my game night, you know. It's it was a bit. In fact, I'll tell you a very short story. When I was in the Scouts, and in them days they had the old-fashioned gloves. You know, you put them on when you was a kid, and they used to come up to your elbow, didn't they? They was that big.
Yeah.
Know? And well, I'd clearly had a lucky punch with this kid who's slightly older than me, and I think the laces must have caught him, you know. And I ran home. I ran out the Scouts up and went home. And about 2 weeks later, they come knocking on the door and asked if I was there. And my mum said, no, he's not here. And they said, oh, can we have the gloves back? That was it. That was the end of my illustrious career, like, you know. So, yeah, I like the training. I like the training aspects of it. I think that's, you know. And I met a young fella in Swaleside, and he was an up-and-coming, you know, good boxer. I'm trying to think of who the fella was in there. Frankie Sims, and he was doing the boxing there, and he had his eye on this young kid and said if he could just leave the puff alone, you know. And I always wondered whether the kid come out, whether he went back to the boxing. But he used to put me through the paces, you know, the old medicine ball, throwing the legs to one side and all this. But no, I don't think I've oh, he was so quick, you know. He kind of say, "You come, Frank, punch me," and all that, you know. And I'd say, "Fucking stand still, I'll have you," and all that. I don't ever touched him because he was that quick. Every time the man went forward, he just went, you know, whichever hand it was, he just went like that. So I gave up after that. But the boys were fun because when I left there, they got me a big card saying, calling me Slugger, goodbye Slugger, and all that. They said, so that was a nice touch for somebody who couldn't even fucking fight, you know. Brilliant. So, what do you think's giving you the most satisfaction, Steve, in all your various projects? What would you say is giving you that little? I'm proud of that.
It's definitely the acting, to be fair. That was the one thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid. It took us a while to get back into it, but it wasn't until I turned 30 really that I had that return to acting. And bearing in mind that I'd walked away from it when I was 17, but all really started with my friendship with a guy called John Altman, who played Nasty Nick in EastEnders.
Yeah.
He basically used to visit Reg Craig at the same time as me. We became friends, and we kept in touch. And when I was working as a nightclub doorman at C Nightclub in Newcastle on the Quayside, I got a phone call from him to say that he was going to come up to Newcastle and basically just have a look at properties where he was going to stay when he was doing a play called Bouncers by John Godber at Sunderland Empire. And he just wanted to know if he could come up and spend the night on the door with me, just as a bit of a way to build up the character, because he was playing a bouncer in the play. And he came up, he had a night out. The manager at the club was over the moon to have a celebrity in for nothing. And, he just watched me with interest. Anyway, as a return favour, a few months later, when he came back up, he offered the chance for me and my wife and my mum to go along and watch the play at Sunderland Empire. And I just remember walking up to the door at Sunderland Empire, and John was actually on the door with the other actor, Nigel Pavaro, who used to play Terry Duckworth in Coronation Street. And as we got to the door, basically just nodded. So I didn't give it away, but it was amazing. Everybody who were going to watch the play were walking past them and didn't realise who it was. It was fantastic. Nobody asking for photographs or autographs. It was just amazing. So good acting from the lads. We watched the play. Of course, the lads didn't want to go out for a night out in Sunderland. They wanted to go to Newcastle. So we went to a place called Apartment in Newcastle, and we had a few drinks. Nigel didn't come out, but me and John and my wife went out, and we just had a few drinks in town. And conversation turned to acting, and it just got brought up that that I'd been an actor. The other actor who was out with us that night, Chris Connell, was actually a Geordie lad, and it was Chris had been on the same course as me at Newcastle College. He'd said Steve used to be an actor. John was going, well, you should give it another go. And it was just one of those things. You've had a few drinks, you go, oh, yeah, I'll do it. And then I never expected Chris Connell to chase up on it, but I got a text off him the next day to say, I've had a word with my agent, Janet. She'd be interested in seeing you. And I went in to see Janet in Newcastle a couple of days later. And I had a sit down with her. She was setting up an actors agent, like an agency, but for extras. So supporting artists, not actually actors. And she said she would take me on the books for that. So I was over the moon in a lot of ways. And I just thought, I'll give it a go. I went along. My very first job turned out not to be an extra role, but actually a speaking role. I got sent along to the place where they used to film a kids program called Biker Grove.
Yeah.
I went along for an audition for a program called 55 Degrees North, which was a detective program on a Sunday night on BBC One.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And the part was for a wheel clamper. And it was a comedy role where I would have to say my line simultaneously with another guy. And to be honest, I'd been to a match the night before and I was a little worse for wear. Plus, it had been a match where I'd been shouting my head off, so my voice was nearly gone. So anyway, I get into the audition room, and the director's sitting there, and I start reading this script that the sides that they provided for us, and the director says, "Stop!" He says, "Something the matter with your boys?" And I went, "Yeah." He says, "You weren't at the match last night, were you?" And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "So was I." So anyway, the director then starts talking about the match for about 15 minutes. We start talking football. He turns out he's a Celtic fan, but he decided to go to the Newcastle game that night. We sat and talked for about 15 minutes. He goes, "Anyway, but I suppose I better get you to read the script again." So anyway, I read the script as best I could. I hadn't been out of the room about 10 minutes, and my phone rings, and it's Janet over the moon to say, "Hey, Steve, well done. You've got the part." Fantastic. And that, that part was great. I mean, the buzz of being involved in something on like a BBC drama, being asked to go, I got picked up in a car, I got taken to the set. I had my own caravan. On my door, I had wheel clamper 1. I had the lines, and it was amazing experience. But I came back down to earth. The money was good on that. I came back down to earth because the second one I did was on Biker Grove, which people will go, "Oh, well, every Geordie's been on Biker Grove. It'll be great going on that." But I was playing a security guard. I had to be on set at 7 o'clock. The money was 2/3 less than I'd just been paid on this thing. I didn't have any lines. And they kept us there for 12 days, despite us actually filming my bit at 9 o'clock in the morning. So it was a reality check. Hollywood would have to wait. But that was it. Yeah, I mean, that was satisfying. I did 6 years as an extra. I loved it. It is exactly how Ricky Gervais portrays it on his comedy program. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch. With a lot of people pretending to be actors who aren't. I'm just resting between jobs. That's why I do it, is probably one of the key phrases. But I decided to go back. I'm not a quitter. And I'd quit that course when I was 17. And that was a bugbear of mine. And because I decided to give up 6 years of my life to be an extra and get some decent little roles and parts, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back and get educated. So at 36 years of age, I was only doing the door by this stage. I'd given in the post office in 1999. And by this time as well, I'm focused now on I'm going to be an actor. So I went and did a GCSE course, a nighttime course on a Tuesday night, which was the first time at the end of it I ended up doing a play. I hadn't done a play since I was a kid, So I did my very first play, Your Home in the West, by Rod Wooden. I played a psychopathic guy called Mickey as a lead role. And I was buzzing. The adrenaline rush I got of doing those lines, performing in front of an audience again after 17 years was amazing. And I knew that's what I wanted to do then. So I then went and did a degree. I did 3 years at Gateshead College, but it was a degree through Newcastle University. And I graduated when I turned 40, doing a performing arts degree. So for the last 9 years now, I can proudly say that I've been a professional actor. Lucky that I got an agent. My very first role was a film called, it was a film that was shot up here with a girl called Joanne Froggatt, who'd been in Coronation Street in Downton. But it was an army film where I was asked a chance to play a sergeant major. I got the audition myself and went along, and the director loved us, gave us the part, and I got that off my own steam. I didn't have an agent though. And at the end of the whole process, at the wrap party, he came up to us and said, "There's anything I can do for you? You've been a big help. You've done your part well." I'd got them access to a boxing gym. I'd not only done that, but I got them access to a nightclub, and I got them some extras who came and played soldiers. I'd bent over backwards to help the director out, and he says, "Look, Steve," he says, "anything I can do for you?" And I says, "Give us an introduction to Sam Claypole, who's casting director and who's an agent," and that's what he did. So in January the following year, this was in the December, January the following year, she agreed to see us at her office, and she signed me up. So 9 years of being a professional, and I've had some great parts. I've loved it. I've had some absolutely fantastic roles. I've had some pretty naff ones as well, but they've all been experiences. And for me, I guess the big one's always your first one, because that was my big break. Even though I was only an extra, I had a speaking part and I got paid good money. I reckon Rise of the Foot Soldier probably took us to a next level. I did the third film in that, which was great, and spending time with, Sean Ryder and Craig Fairbrass and the rest of the lads on the film was actually fantastic. Some really established actors that I was working with, and then to do Vera, which again is a big thing in the Northeast, but it's a nationwide TV show. It still gets regularly 7-8 million people watching on a Sunday night. To play the villain in that was great as well. But I don't take acting too seriously. I think that's the best way. I spin a lot of plates. Obviously, I've got a couple of other interests. I'm a promoter. I'm a book writer. Got my own publishing company. But for me, spinning those plates is important, because as an actor, if you're sitting around waiting around for the phone to ring, you're going to be very disappointed. You've got to make your own luck, and in a lot of ways I have. And I guess with lockdown, it's probably made us realise that even more, because for 15 months sitting in the house, like a lot of people, twiddling our thumbs, not being able to do what we normally do, I've had to find other avenues. And I'm not shy. Setting up my own YouTube channel, my Steve Wraith YouTube channel, has been a big success, and I've enjoyed it. We've had you on, Frank, speaking to you about your life, which is fascinating. And I've met many others, but I always feel like I don't like to copy people, and I've just gone down a separate avenue. I've gone down what I love to talk about, which is Newcastle United. So predominantly our show is about football. We talk football, but I've had some great guests on. David Icke, interviewed Tommy Robinson, interviewed various controversial people, but also try to keep them on football as well. David Icke program was about things which people would never have dreamed of asking about. Like, he was the Hereford reserve goalkeeper.
Yes, right. I remember that. Yeah.
When Newcastle got beat off Hereford in the FA Cup, which gets shown once a year, and we talked about that. But he was also the commentator when Kevin Keegan scored the first goal of his career at Newcastle when we beat Queen's Park Rangers 1-0. So, that interview with David Icke's not what people expect. We don't talk about the Queen being a lizard and stuff like that. We talk about football. And he loved it. He came off air and went, "Wow, I didn't expect that." He still managed to get a little bit in at the end, but I just kept him off it. But yeah, I guess I've had to reinvent myself like a lot of people. But
for the record, Steve, you did kindly invite me on, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. You made me feel very welcome, and as I say, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was just a natural thing to invite you on frankly speaking. I think eventually myself and Mac the Hat will forgive you, because you did nick a job off of a Cockney by doing the Artful Dodger. So, as soon as you put such a big workload in, we wish you success with your acting. We never forget us Cockneys.
Should I consider myself?
Oh, very good, very good, very good. Yeah, and as for the extra bit, that's provoked a thought in me as well, because I have a friend called Johnny Kinch, and he's a very talented guy, and. We were talking one day anyway. He's going to be doing his own film very soon, The Methodist, and he said, "Frank, how do you feel about being an extra?" And I thought, yeah, go on for a laugh. I said, yes, and it's a different experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I said, what's the options? And he said, how do you feel about being a dead body in the boot of a car?
Oh, God.
And then he got a little bit self-conscious. He said, oh, sorry. He said, I went, no, listen, it was only a matter of time. I said, before I landed up as a dead body in the boot of a car anyway. I said, so it's quite befitting, so that's going to be, he said, oh, it'll be good. He tried to make it as interesting as possible. He said, oh, you'll love it, all the makeup, you'll be full of bullet holes and God knows what. And I thought, oh, yeah, go on. So whenever, it was clearly not this year, it'll be next year. So I shall look forward to my 5 minutes of fame, if you like,
Great stuff.
So what's the current plan then, Steve, before we finish up?
I'm pleased to say that the wheels of industry are turning again. I mean, from my point of view, promotion-wise, I have got a couple of events lined up. I've got an event with the rave band QFX in August, Bad Manners in Newcastle in September, and a Newcastle United theatre show in September as well, with former players coming to talk on stage to support us. I'm not going to go too wild with events. I mean, we've got Eubank and Ben lined up, but at the moment I'm quite tentative on that. That's a nationwide tour, and obviously with the way that things are going with COVID, you can never be too sure whether you can plan in advance these days, because you can sell a load of tickets and then find that you've got to postpone again. So I'm hoping that still comes off. On the acting front, I've got a couple of feature films which I've got parts in, which have been on hold since COVID broke, but I'm pleased to say that the finance is there for both of those films. So I start filming again in October. I'm playing a policeman in October in a film, which is a bit of a change. I usually play the bad guy. And then I've got another feature which starts filming in late January 22, where I play my first lead role as a villain, playing a Russian hitman. So looking forward to that. And I've got another documentary coming out, which I've been working on with a guy called Richard John Taylor, which is about my relationship with the Craze, which we talked about at the start of the programme. Comes out on all downloadable services and out on DVD. It'll be available nationwide. The Craze Gangsters Behind Bars comes out on the 27th of September. So, we had the premiere for that a couple of weeks ago in Newcastle, and then one in London the following week. And they went really well. It was great. Just nice turnout. The feedback's been fantastic off that. So that's great. Books wise, after having such a productive year last year, I haven't really had the time because of the podcast and other things to sit and write books this year. I am going to be bringing out a book with Charlie Salvador's first wife, Irene Dunroe. That's going to be called The Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. But she's written the book herself, so we're just editing and putting that together for her. And also bringing out a book with a guy called James Cars, which is about boxing. The Tower of Boxing. It's a bit like the Tower of Jeet Kune Do that Bruce Lee did, but about boxing. Fascinating book for any pugilist fans out there. It'll be a real good interest and looks into the different styles of different fighters and punching methods, etc. It's a little bit different, but James teaches at a high level, and I think for the boxing purists, people will really enjoy that. So yeah, publishing books. Going to continue to do the podcast. Got some great podcasts lined up for the next few weeks, and also back to the football for as long as we can in case we get locked down again. I was at York on Saturday. I'm off to Doncaster this Friday. I've just got my ticket for Rotherham next Tuesday, and then we've got the delights of Burton the following Friday, and then the season kicks off. But Newcastle United's in me blood. It's something that keeps people sane. People like me sane, people like you sane. Football does, and for me, I intend to spend a lot of time on the road following my team this year, because with COVID, I've certainly missed that.
Yeah.
And people want to buy books. Obviously, the links. I'm sure you'll put them in the description.
Yeah, we'll sort that out, Steve. Well, we always say this. I always make the point of saying this. The criteria for coming on to Frankly Speaking is we want real and inspiring guests, and you've certainly been that today. And I wish you really well, all the best in the future. And I don't think you're going to need luck, to be perfectly honest, because you're obviously a very determined man, and when you want something, you're prepared to work hard to get it. And I certainly hope you go even further in your acting career, because that's clearly something that's a passion of yours. So yeah, on behalf of everybody watching today, we really appreciate you coming and sharing your story and your experiences, and I hope some of your enthusiasm rubs off other people to go out and fulfil their dreams as well. If you can just stay on for another couple of minutes, Steve, I just want to make a last few announcements. Again, I'd like to thank everybody that supports the podcast. It's very much appreciated. And I'd like to thank our new sponsor, Sheet Roofing Limited. I hope they'll be with us for some time. And, of course, Mac the Hat Media for all their support and advice. But, the podcast today belongs to Steve. And as I say, Steve, thanks very much for coming along today. And we very much enjoyed your company, and we wish you all the best for the future, mate.
Yeah, same to you guys. Thanks for having us on. And just, anybody who's out there listening who, maybe has been inspired by the story, always have belief in yourself. That's the key. And just be the best that you can be. That's what I would say. Nothing's impossible. But nothing comes for free. You've always got to work hard for it. That's always been my motive and my motto. And not everything works out. I think when you handpick stories like you do when Frank or I interview people, then ultimately it all sounds as if everything's going smoothly. But we've all had bad days, bad moments, and bad times, and it's those things that make you better. The amount of auditions that I haven't passed, that I've wanted a part so much and not got it, far outweigh the ones that I get. But those things really, the knockbacks, is what makes you stronger, and that's what pushes you on. So, don't get yourself down, dust yourself off and go again. That's probably the best advice I can give anybody. And that's not just in acting, that's in life in general,
That's lovely. Steve, all the best, mate. And I'll keep in touch. Cheers, pal.
Thanks, lads.
Cheers.